I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com, and joined now for the last episode of 2018 by San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald. Nice to put that pressure on you, Jeff. The Spurs have been playing better since a very brutal spate of 30-point losses in the span of just a week. However, a transformation happened almost immediately, and they're now 8-2 with most of the victories coming by double-digit margins. So a nice turnaround. However, what's going on? What's been happening over the past several games? It seems like a different team.
Yeah, it has been a different team. And, you go back to the end of November, beginning of December, where they are just getting blown off the court. They're one of only two teams in NBA history to suffer 30-point losses in a 1 week span. They lost to Minnesota, Houston, and Utah in that stretch. And it looks pretty dire. They were 3 games below 500 for the first time in 10 years. Didn't really know where the answers were going to come from. You kind of thought at that point the best case scenario is they just sort of slowly build into something. But instead, it was kind of like a snap your fingers, and not only are they winning games, they're being the ones to blow people off the court. You mentioned all those double-digit wins, but a lot of them were at one point they had posted 5 consecutive wins of 25 points or more, and they were the second team in NBA history to accomplish that feat. So it just sort of, there was this turnabout in almost immediately. And I think when you look at it, it's been mostly on the defensive end. They were a terrible defensive team, terrible defensive team. And during that stretch of 10 games, they are basically the best defensive team in the league, or at least top 5. You look at some of the other numbers, in those 10 games, they're first in the league in net rating, first in offensive rating, second in defensive rating, second in wins, first in field goal percentage, first in 3-point percentage, first in field goal percentage allowed, third in 3-point percentage allowed. So they're they've been basically, you could argue, the best team in the league for 10 games. Whether that can, carry forward is sort of the question of the season. Most of those 10 games, all but 2 of them actually were at home. They had 2 road games, split them. So the question now is, can they somehow take their show on the road? And they've got a pretty tricky back-to-back looming against the Denver team they just beat in the AT&T Center, but now they're playing them in Denver, and then the LA Clippers the following night. So can they do it on the road is sort of the question du jour.
Yeah, the Spurs are seeming a lot kind of like the stock market nowadays, the volatility. But I guess, to use that example, the stock market generally does go up. Money definitely usually increases over time. So hopefully that's a good sign for the Spurs. But I'm wondering, do you think this increase in defense and this really sudden increase with, blowing out these other teams, aside from that recent loss to Houston, which was just a 7-point loss, is this the team coming together, or can we really go ahead and, tip the cap to Greg Popovich on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with getting used to each other, and learning how to play defense with each other. I think when we think in terms of the chemistry of a basketball team, a lot of fans sort of think of that as an offensive thing, like, knowing where a guy's going to cut, and then you hit him with a pass at the basket, or knowing what spots he likes, to get his shots from. But there's a chemistry to defense too, because it's that thing has to work as a unit. Like when people describe what an effective NBA defense looks like, if you kind of picture every single person connected by the same string. So one guy moves this way, and the rest of the defense rotates with him, and another guy moves back, and the rest of the defense rotates back. And if any part of that string is broken, the defense shuts down. So it takes a lot of chemistry and on-court time to perfect that. And I don't think, just personnel-wise, when you look at who the Spurs have personnel-wise, they're not going to be the best defensive team in the league over time. I always thought they could get better, as they spent more time together learning each other. I didn't expect like a snap the finger sort of thing, and all of a sudden for 10 games, they're the second best defensive team in the league. And, I don't know that they can carry that level we talk so much about the Spurs defense this year and how just this is the worst defense Greg Popovich has ever had to coach. there's only one team in the league this season that has held opponents to under 100 points in 6 consecutive games, and that is the San Antonio Spurs. And it happened during that stretch for their 8-2. So I expected them to get better. I did not expect it to be so dramatic and so quick. And I'm not really expecting to be this good defensively, all season long. But I think if they can be somewhere in the neighborhood, you got a pretty solid basketball team.
Let's take a moment to talk about kind of some missing pieces that might make their way back into the Spurs, starting with Pau Gasol. Missed 26 games with a left foot injury. Of course, he was an integral part of the Spurs bench at the time. In his place, 23-year-old Jakob Poeltl has really begun to take off as the Spurs backup center. But with Poeltl's rise, what happens, if Gasol comes back from injury? Is he a bit obsolete? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's going to be a big rotation question for Greg Popovich if and when Pau gets back on the floor. And I don't know that we're real close to that right now. Pau's just now starting to do some on-court kind of rehab on that foot. But when he does come back, he was a guy, I think fans like to there's a certain segment of Spurs fans that like to grumble about Gasol because he does have a pretty large contract and, he's a bench player. And at 38, I mean, he's a guy that's going to go to the Hall of Fame. But at 38, he's not the same player he was at 28, which, most of us aren't. So Spurs fans kind of have a love-hate relationship with him. But he was a very, as you mentioned, integral part of that second unit, just helping the ball move. He kind of quarterbacked the thing from the center position. And when he went out, I think that second unit missed him a lot. I think as Poeltl has started to find his groove, though, he's become an integral part of that second unit in a different way. Just hustle plays, rebounding, tap outs on the offensive board, screen setting. Like when you look at what the Spurs second unit is doing, and that's really that's where they're generating all their 3-pointers from, really, is the second unit. A lot of it is Poeltl and his screen setting and his pick and roll game. That's a big part of generating that. And, this is a guy that was a lottery pick just 2 years ago. He wasn't, I think a lot of people think of Poeltl as just some throw in from the DeMar DeRozan, Kawhi Leonard deal, but this is a guy that, is still very young in his basketball career. And when he was drafted, people thought of him as a lottery pick top guy. So he's got a guy that has a high ceiling. And we're starting to see that now. And I really wonder, as well as he is playing and meshing with that second unit, if Pau Gasol comes back tomorrow, can you really take Poeltl out of the lineup? And, I wouldn't do it at this point. I mean, the way Jakob has been playing and considering he's probably going to get better. So, it's going to be interesting because, like I mentioned, Pau Gasol is a Hall of Famer and he's making a lot of money. But this second unit has sort of found something with Jakob Poeltl as the center in that unit. So that'll be something worth monitoring, down the line.
So more injury talk. Of course, injuries not so unoften, if you were to put it that way, for the Spurs this season. We've already talked about the week of hell, but we won't go back into that. But of course, rookie Lonnie Walker IV active for the first time in Wednesday's victory over Denver, but he didn't play. After that, returned to the G League for more rehab games. So his debut seems closer than ever. It was very close in Denver, didn't happen. What kind of impact do you think he can have for a Spurs team that, as you've been mentioning, is already sort of putting the pieces together in other ways, and then they add another player?
Yeah, I think Lonnie Walker is a guy that sort of stirred the fans' imagination. I mean, he's picked 18th overall, which isn't a lottery pick, but he's in the top 20. The Spurs haven't had a top 20 guy. I mean, outside of Kawhi Leonard, who they traded for on draft night in 2011, they haven't had a guy inside the top 20 since Tim Duncan in 1997. So Lonnie Walker is sort of just pedigree-wise is different than the kind of rookie the Spurs are used to getting in here. And I think fans are really, really excited about that. You saw him in Summer League in Las Vegas. You saw sort of the athleticism that he can provide and the playmaking that he can provide, which is something that the Spurs have been lacking pretty much for about 40 years or so. Like that's just not what they are. So I think the fans are really in love with the idea of Lonnie Walker, and we haven't seen him yet. And so there's this kind of clamor to, we want Lonnie kind of thing. The other last night when he was active for the first time ever. Got to wear the uniform on the bench, and if things go a certain way, Lonnie Walker makes his NBA debut. I think there was a little bit of buzz around that, and there was definitely some buzz, talking to Lonnie in the locker room before the game. He wasn't assured playing time, but there was this sort of thought this could be the day. But he is a guy that's in the pipeline, and he's not going to be out for the season. Like at some point, he's going to get in there, and we're going to get to see what he does. I think if fans are expecting him to have some sort of large impact on a playoff push, I'm not sure. We'll see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I'm not sure that's necessarily in the cards because as we've been talking, they've sort of put together this puzzle that seems to be working right now. I don't know there's a huge reason to mess with a good thing. Now maybe Lonnie Walker gets healthy, gets some practice time in, they get him in some NBA games, and he's just so good, he blows everyone away, and he's kind of, we got to get this guy on the floor kind of thing. Maybe that happens. Maybe he's that type of talent. But I just think with the time he's missed so far, and just not having a training camp, not having a preseason, missing the first couple months of the season, the G League has been good for him to just kind of get into gear and get a lot of that kind of stuff under his belt. But I don't think he's a guy that even when he does play in a few games, I don't think he's a guy that's going to move the needle at first. I do think, on paper, he does have the kind of talent that he's going to be a part of the long-term plan for this team. Absolutely. But I think fans maybe get a little bit ahead of themselves when it comes to a guy like Lonnie Walker, and for good reason, because when you do see him play, he does some exciting things.
Let's now jump to the bigger names for the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, the NBA opened the polls for All-Star voting. The Spurs have placed a representative in 19 consecutive All-Star games. That's the longest streak in the league, although this does seem the year when maybe some of those Spurs streaks might be in jeopardy. Can they keep it alive this year with either DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, or maybe both of them?
Yeah, they have some candidates. I think a lot is going to depend on when it gets down to February. Let's face it. Since Tim Duncan, at least, the Spurs don't have guys voted on to the All-Star team by the fans, or voted in as starters. They're getting guys on, the reserve units picked by the coaches, which in some ways is sort of more. That's I don't want to say a bigger honor, but sometimes the fans will pick guys that have been injured all year just because they like their names. You're being picked by the coaches. You're being picked by people that know what they're talking about. So when it gets to February, I think a lot is going to depend on what does the Spurs record look like? Where are they sitting at the West? If they're back down there in 14th place, it's going to be hard to argue that a guy like DeMar DeRozan or LaMarcus Aldridge should be on the team, really, no matter what their numbers are. But the Spurs are up there in that playoff mix. If they're in the 4 or 5 area, if they're above that, geez, I think it's almost going to be a no-brainer that they have one of those guys make the team. I think DeRozan has played very well in his first season in San Antonio. He's a guy that kind of came here under some what do you want to say, just less than ideal circumstances. The Spurs didn't want to trade Kawhi Leonard. DeMar DeRozan didn't want to be traded from Toronto, but he's come to San Antonio and made the most of it so far. He's their top scorer, over 23 points a game. He's their top assist man, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming, including Greg Popovich, who's kind of raved about DeRozan's playmaking and passing ability as something he didn't really know DeRozan really had in his arsenal. And then, Aldridge has had, he had infamously had a really, really tough start to the season. Just November might have been the worst shooting month of his entire career. But he's a guy that's made, I think, 6 of the last 7 All-Star teams, and he's really coming on as the Spurs are surging. I think probably when you get down to it, DeRozan's going to be their top candidate, and probably Aldridge would be like a 1B on that list. But a lot's going to depend on how well the Spurs playing as we get to that point in early February. Do they deserve to have someone on the All-Star team? It's almost going to be a team award this year if they do keep that streak alive and get it to 20 straight All-Star games.
And then wrapping up here for the last episode of 2018, there's a few games left in the year, and then, of course, we move to January. So later today, they got the rematch against Denver, then the 29th, LA, Boston, Toronto, Memphis up to the 5th of January. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are everyone in San Antonio and maybe Toronto has that January 3rd game against the Raptors circled like a million times in red ink, because that's going to be, if that's slated to be, scheduled to be Kawhi Leonard's triumphant return to the AT&T Center after all the unpleasantness. I know there's some fans around here who are dubious that Leonard will actually make that trip, but he's scheduled to be here, and I'd say it's going to be interesting how he'll be received, but I don't think it's really a question that it's not going to be a warm welcome. I don't think, after the again, the unpleasantness of last season.
You don't think people accepted his apology letter? You don't think it's all water under the bridge?
I really, 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 really would be surprised if that happens. But yeah, I think that's the one everyone is kind of keeping an eye on. If Kawhi comes down here to Texas and appears at the AT&T Center first time since the trade, and then there's other like minor storylines to that. You've got Danny Green roundly applauded when he's announced, and then you've got the flip side of it where you've got DeMar DeRozan playing against his old team and a team he didn't want to leave, and one of his maybe his best friend certainly in the game, and Kyle Lowry is on that Raptors team, and even you've got Jakob Poeltl playing against his old team as well. So a lot of that'll be an emotional night for a lot of reasons and for a lot of people. And I think that of the games you mentioned in that stretch, I think that's the one we're all kind of gearing up for. January 3rd, Toronto Raptors at the AT&T Center.
Yeah, that'll be nice. The dichotomy from fan reaction of Danny Green, who left too soon in a lot of people's eyes, and then Kawhi Leonard. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't give one. I don't think you can give one a tribute video without giving the other. So that's going to be interesting how they play that.
Yeah. Tribute video for Danny Green, and then just like, and now Kawhi Leonard. Yeah. All right. Wow. Yeah. Obviously, that's the big game. I was trying to tease you out, see if we could get some predictions for everything else, but you correctly chose Toronto on the 3rd. What a way to start off the new year, 2019, in style. Well, yeah, great to have you on today's program. Any final thoughts for 2018? This is the last Spurs Insider of the calendar year.
I think Spurs fans will be glad to see this year end. I don't think it was a very fun year for the Spurs, for Spurs fans. Probably for a team that's been just blessed for 20-something years. 2018 was kind of a bummer, with Kawhi's long-term injury, and then the trade, and then the slow start to this season. They're starting to pick it up now in December, so maybe January will portend something a little more pleasant than 2018 was for poor Spurs fans who just never can seem to catch a break, except for the 5 titles.
And a big 2018 thank you to San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald for joining me for today and all the other episodes he's appeared on of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, see you in 2019. I'm Chance Dorland.